everybody. My name is Tyler Lambert. A little bit of background on myself. I've been with Cargus for over 5 years now, working with Business Central, Dynamics GP, and Power BI, specializing in the finance modules of those different products. And today's discussion is going to be about updates to Business Central setup related to 1099 reporting. So really what the crux of these updates is about is making it easier for you to submit those 1099 documents directly to the IRS through an API in Business Central, as opposed to printing those things off and mailing them through traditional methods. In addition, we can also harness the power of email to remit those 1099s to each individual vendor, again, eliminating the need to print anything off and use the actual mail for that. So let's go ahead and take a look at some things that I've got in my report here. So why is Business Central changing this setup? So like I said, the IRS did recently change some rules, actually in reporting year 2023, to change the reporting requirement for number of vendors per company that would qualify you to submit your 1099s electronically. And really that number went down from 250 down to 10. So odds are that many people on this call now qualify for this electronic filing. I noted here that IRIS, I-R-I-S, is the Information Return Intake System, and that's really the name of the IRS tool that Business Central connects to submit those 1099s for you. And finally, just to sort of recap what I said, the new functionality is designed to make validating amounts and remitting those documents more streamlined. So with this Business Central update, there are going to be a number of new screens that you're going to have to learn how to use and actually proceed through them in your company here. So I've gone ahead and called out those screens here, as well as what the purpose of those screens are. So when we get into the actual demonstration part here, once we get through the PowerPoint, one of the first screens we'll look at there is called IRS reporting periods. What that's used for is to define the year of which you're trying to report on information. So think 2023, 2024, those would relate to the calendar years. IRS 1099 forms are going to be copies of all those different forms that we could potentially be generating 1099s for. So things like the miscellaneous form, the dividend form, the NEC form, those will all be examples of an IRS 1099 form. And within each one of those forms, we have several different boxes that could be filled in with different amounts depending on the source of those amounts. So if you're familiar with the 1099 miscellaneous form, you have options like miscellaneous 01, miscellaneous 02, and those would relate to things like rents or royalties, some of the more common ones. We're going to take a look then at the IRS vendor form box setup, and that's going to kind of be connecting all of that new 1099 setup to our actual vendors. So assigning them a form, assigning them a box, saying, hey, Tyler's my vendor. He's a miscellaneous vendor for miscellaneous 01. And you can set those up to default on a per vendor basis, just like we have in the current setup. But you can also control that on a transaction by transaction basis if for whatever reason a transaction with that vendor would fall under a different code. And finally, the last new screen we're going to look at is called IRS 1099 form documents. And you can see, like I said here, that's sort of going to be our final product where we review those amounts. We can transmit those amounts directly to the IRS from that page, as well as either print those things out or email them directly to our vendors. So those are the new screens that you've never seen before that we're going to review today. But as part of this new setup, we will be visiting some familiar screens that you have done already for 1099 setup. And one of those that I'd like to call out here is the vendor card. Now, this is a really small snippet of both the old version and the new version of the vendor card there. But I'd really like you to focus in on the payment section here. So that would be over here on this side. This is the old one. Again, there was just that one field related to 1099 usage on our vendor card. That was this one right here called IRS 1099 code. But if we direct our attention to the other side of the page now, this updated vendor card, you can see there's actually several different fields related to the IRS. We have IRS reporting period, IRS 1099 form number, IRS 1099 form box number, receiving 1099 e-form consent, and the last one here, email for IRS. So a lot more setup there, and we'll get into the details of how exactly you're going to handle all of that. All right, so here I've gone ahead and briefly just talked about the different pages we're going to look at during our live demo. And so without looking at this again, I think now would be a good time to just go ahead and dive into that demo right now. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and pull up my Business Central here. I'm in a production environment, but this is just my own tenant. So this does not belong to a customer or anything. And I did create a sample company here for today's demonstration called IRS Demo 2. So let's go ahead and see how we would start with all of this activity. So first thing you're going to want to do to enable this updated 1099 procedures is to go into feature management within Business Central and actually enable this feature. So this is something that you have to manually go in and enable. This will not be done for you automatically as of this time. So again, to navigate there, I'd use my global search icon and I'd type in feature management. Go ahead and use the link, and that's going to take me to a list of all the features that are available for me to turn on within Business Central. And the one that we want to focus in on today is this one right here called Feature Update. Enable using 1099 forms to transmit the tax data to the IRS in the United States. Furthermore, you can see that in my environment, that feature is already enabled for all users. So I've done that obviously ahead of time for today's training. But if yours says none there instead of all users, you're going to want to go ahead and just flip that option. And that can be done as easily as just clicking into that field and cycling it from none to all users. Business Central is then going to ask you a couple of questions here to say, hey, are you sure you want to do this? Is now a good time to do this? It might take a little bit. I might have to update some stuff. So you can just go ahead and say yes to all those prompts as they come up. And when you're done with that, you'll be at this page and you can go ahead and confirm that this line here is indeed bold green here and is active for all users. So that's step one. Step two is we want to make sure that the form boxes we have in Business Central are up to date and accurate for the reporting year in question. So to get to that page, to check it out, we're going to again use our global search, and it's going to be for a page called 1099 form boxes. This is a legacy page here that you may have already been on or be familiar with. So if we go ahead and access that page, we can see it looks like this. And the only reason I need you to come to this page is to confirm if this banner up here says what it says. Like it says here for me, you are compliant with the latest format of 1099 reporting. That's great. If yours says that, you don't need it to do anything further on this page. But if it doesn't, and it says that you're out of date, you can go ahead and remedy that by just clicking the Update Form Boxes button here. Now, the only caveat that I'd like to warn you about as it relates to updating these form boxes here is that that's going to overwrite all of those old setups. So think previous years. So you only want to do this if you don't have a need to print off any 1099s using that legacy layout. And I'm going to go ahead and say that that's probably not a consideration for many of you. One, because you probably already updated this last year when you did your 1099s, and there have been no changes between 2023 and 2024. Or if you haven't done that, you can go ahead and do this so long as you don't need to produce, like I said, anything 2 years older or older at this point, which is unlikely. So once you're in compliance here, like I am, we're ready to get into some of this new setup here. And the first page we're going to want to go to for our new setup is called IRS reporting periods. And pretty much all of these new screens that we're going to be showing you today are all prefixed with that IRS. So whenever you see something like IRS, that usually means it's talking about one of these new feature pages. So if I type IRS there, see all these related boxes, I believe we'll be talking about all of these today. But we'll go ahead and start in IRS reporting periods. Before I get to IRS reporting periods, though, I just realized I forgot to do one step here. After we check the form boxes were compliant, like we just did, I actually need to go to Assisted Setup next and have Business Central help me with just this base setup here. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and just type in Assisted Setup. There it is. And I'm going to want to go and find the relevant feature here to have Business Central help me set up. And if I scroll down this list, under the Report on Financial Health section is this option here, Set up an IRS Forms feature. You can see that's currently not already completed in this company, so we need to do this. And this is pretty self-explanatory. You mostly just click through all the prompts here, but we'll talk about it as we go through. So I'll click on that. It's basically saying, hey, welcome, you're about to set up this new IRS feature. Sounds great. I'll go ahead and click next. It's first going to prompt me which reporting year I'd like to start with. And for many of you, that'll be 2024. But since I'm in this sample company, it does have a lot of test information from 2023 in there. So I'm going to go ahead and use 2023 as my year for this demonstration. You then have two options for how you'd like Business Central to populate this setup for you. The first option is create new setup. And that's something you'd like to do if maybe this is a newly created company and you haven't done any 1099 related stuff in here. But if you have been doing 1099s out of Business Central for the past few years and you're already using that existing setup, you can go ahead and opt for this option here called Transfer Existing Setup. That's going to read all that legacy stuff, which again is still relevant as far as the setup is concerned, and bring that into our new procedure here. So I'll go ahead and use that existing setup, go ahead and say next, and then it's going to ask me again, hey, this might have to update some stuff. Do you want to do this now, or do I want to schedule this in the future? I'm going to go ahead and just accept it here and run it right now. The last page here, we're going to have two options, collect details for lines, which should be turned on. And what the impact of this setting here is when this is turned on, it's actually going to be helpful for you when it comes time to query those 1099 balances. This is going to include a drill through field on those documents within Business Central that you can drill down and see all the detail that makes up those reportable amounts. So again, good to turn that on. The next option here is called Protect TIN. TIN is your taxpayer identification number. I would advise you that you use the option Protect TIN for vendors and company. And what this is going to do is if you do end up emailing and printing any of those forms, it's going to go ahead and sort of mask the first 5 digits of your federal ID number. So I believe that's a 9-digit thing. It'll mask the first 5 with asterisks, and then you'd be able to confirm with those last 4 whether or not they appear accurate on that printed document. And those taxpayer identification numbers will pull from the Business Central setup. So if I say next, that's all I need to do. Then I can go ahead and say finish, and that should go ahead and take care of what I need to do there. So again, I did get a little ahead of myself about it a minute ago, and I tried to go to the IRS reporting periods page. And now since we've run the assisted setup, we're ready to finally go to that page. Go ahead and type in that shorthand up top. We'll navigate to the IRS reporting periods page. So the first thing we'll notice is there's already an IRS reporting period set up here for me. And this was a result of me running that assisted setup. So that's why I needed to do that before we got in here. But I can see it's gone ahead and assigned this reporting period a code here, 2023, makes sense. We've defined a starting and ending date range there for that reportable period. And in addition, I can see how many forms exist in that period, again, pulled from that setup in the system. I can drill down on this number 4 here to look at those forms. And then furthermore, I can drill down on any of these box counts over here to see the individual boxes on each of those forms. So again, I've been using miscellaneous as an example here. If I drill down on the 15 there, I can see what those 15 boxes on that miscellaneous report are. So again, here are the 2 most common ones I talked about, rent and royalties. You can see the name, the description, and the minimum reportable amount for those. So what this means is if you've sent this person less than $600 related to this, it's not even going to create a form for that because it doesn't meet the minimum reportable amount. I will say at this point, Business Central actually does give you the power to modify either those forms or their individual boxes. I don't really see a reason for you to have to do that since this is system standard setup and really shouldn't have to be changed. But at any rate, I'm going to show you this feature anyway, just in case you would have a need for this. If you do click the forms option on the toolbar here, it will give you an option to change those form names, either the number or the name. And in addition, you can actually go into the form boxes here, do the same thing there, change those numbers, descriptions, or minimum reportable amounts. But again, this is stuff that you really should not have to change. So that's all great. We've sort of set up this reporting period 2023 here, but what we haven't done yet is actually assign this to any of our vendors. So if I were to go through right now with just processing vendor invoices and payments, none of that would be denoted as 1099 liable. So to associate all of these rules here with my different vendors, from this page here, I can select vendor setup on the toolbar there. That's going to drill me down to a further setup page where I can then define all of my vendors and the associated 1099 form and box number that I'd like to use for default on transactions for that vendor. Again, like I alluded to earlier on the call, on a transaction by transaction basis, you can modify those values, but it is nice to set them up, for default for your vendors just to start here. So to kick that process off, notice this entire table is blank. I can populate it with a list of my vendors if I click suggest on the toolbar here. When I do that, it's going to prompt me to apply filters here. Maybe I only want to do this for certain vendors, but for today's demo, I'll just go ahead and do it for all vendors. So I won't provide a filter condition. I'll just say okay. And I can see what it's done there for me is create lines for each of my vendors here. Note that these lines are really blank here for each vendor though. It's up to me now to manually add those form and box numbers. So I'm just going to go ahead and say that all of my vendors are miscellaneous 01. So I'd select the miscellaneous form with the miscellaneous 01 box number. If I want to quickly propagate those changes to the remainder of the vendors here, we have a shortcut key F8 will copy the value from the line above. So if I just go F8 down key, F8 down key, I can go ahead and propagate that setup to the remainder of vendors. Now, one thing to note here is as I'm setting up these vendors, this is going to take action here on all newly created purchase documents that I decide to create in the system. But at this point, if I have any history in there, like a vendor ledger entry, posted activity, or even activity that I've drafted but not yet posted, like a purchase invoice, this setup is not going to propagate to all those documents. And I'd like to demonstrate that for you right here. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this page because I do plan to come back to that page just the way it was. But I want to simultaneously show you a sales doc and also the vendor ledger entries so that we can all verify that none of this 1099 stuff exists there at the moment. So I'm going to go home under my purchasing list page. I should be able to go to purchase invoices. I did go ahead and set up a test invoice for Fabricam for today's demonstration. And if I go ahead and open that up there, I can check. First thing I'd want to look at is the posting date here, because the posting date is actually going to be our key field to determine which reporting period it goes in. So again, right now I just have the one reporting period for 2023. This posting date, May 2023, obviously within that range there. So I'd sort of expect this one to be tagged with miscellaneous 01. But you'll notice if I slide down here to the shipping and payment section where all that information is defined, you can see it's all blank. And again, we're going to review that in a second here, how to sort of propagate that setup out to all of your posted and drafted docs. But the point still stands, just setting that up in there is not enough to sort of propagate that to all in-process docs. Now to that point though, if I were to draft a new purchase invoice for Fabricam at this point, I sort of would expect this stuff to fill in because at this point, it is in my setup and I am creating a new doc. Let's go ahead and verify that. If I click the plus button on the top to start drafting new invoice, go ahead and select the relevant vendor there, Fabricam. Make sure my posting date is within that range. So it defaulted to 2024 here for me. We'll go ahead and manually modify that to 2023. And when I do, I scroll down here to my shipping and payment section. There's that setup information that I desired to have on here. So that looks like it's working great for me. One more thing I'd like to point out here. Remember, we only currently have a reporting period set up for 2023. So what would happen if I came back up here and updated this posting date to something outside of those bounds, say 2024? If I then scroll down here, I can see that updated this information. It's no longer part of any reporting period that we've set up. Therefore, it's not getting tagged to anything. So this is the new important boxes here that I'd like you to be, keep a keen observation on as you're posting your vendor invoices. Make sure all that's working the way you want it to. All right, so we reviewed the documents. Let's go ahead and review the vendor ledger entries now and see how we can modify those things to include the relevant pieces of information. Use my global search, start typing in vendor ledger entries. We'll go to that page. And if you've ever tried to query the vendor ledger entries before, there is a couple columns all the way over to the right here, titled IRS 1099 reporting period, IRS 1090 form number, and the form box there, as well as the reporting amount. And if I quickly scroll through this list, you'll see that it's blank or 0 for every single record on this entire list here. And again, that's because all this historical information was already in here before I did the setup about 5 minutes ago. So I really wouldn't reasonably expect all of that stuff to have just automatically applied to all this posted activity. But we do have, tools at our disposal here to actually propagate that setup choices to all this posted stuff and the in-process stuff. Let me show you that right now. So I'm going to switch tabs back to the vendor form box setup where we set up our vendors. And let's go ahead and propagate this stuff for Fabricam here. So with Fabricam selected, I go to the toolbar under Actions and Propagate. When I do that, it's going to bring up another window here to confirm where and when I'd like to propagate those things to. So it's automatically filled in that reporting period here for me, 2023. That's accurate. But down here, I can choose to apply that to open, unposted purchase documents, as well as those historically posted vendor ledger entries at this point if I wish. So I'll go ahead and select both of those and I'll click OK. And it doesn't really give me a success message or anything like that, but I can, we'll go ahead and confirm that that happened here right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my vendor ledger entries page. Let's go ahead and refresh that bad boy to make sure we're getting all the good information in there. Let's go ahead and apply filters down here. So I think the only vendor I propagated right there for was just vendor 10,000. So let's filter down to just that vendor in question. And furthermore, I only did the period 2023. So some of these posting dates in like 2024, I wouldn't have expected to be affected, but I just sorted by posting date. So we're looking at all 2023 information here. This should be good. I'll scoot over here to those relevant fields that I discussed earlier. And voila, here we did get those fields propagated onto the invoices. So that's why we're only seeing it like on every other paid line here, right? It only gets attached to the invoices. So like this line here, the payments, that's not really related to 1099s, even though they are, but they obtain their 1099 information from the underlying invoice. So we can see that that did get populated there. That's looking good. Awesome. One more thing, we'll go ahead and check on that document that I just drafted for Fabricam, see if that got updated at all. So if I go to purchasing, purchase invoices, should have 2 in process for Fabricam here. And at this point, if they're both posting a 2023, I'd expect them both to have this information here like they currently do. So again, that propagation is not really something that you'll have to do every single year because ideally we're setting this up and it's going to just go ahead and process the way it should for the entire year. But if you are implementing this here sort of at the end of the year, like we're talking about now, you're probably going to have to do that propagation step there. All right, so now before we get into actually generating the 1099s, just want to drive over to the vendor card one more time because I think those differences that I showed you were a little difficult to see on the PowerPoint. So I just like to show you that on the vendor card here in Business Central. So if I go under purchasing, vendors, I'll go ahead and just open first vendor on the list here. And it looks like I've already sort of gotten myself where I need to be here in the payment section. But we can go ahead and see that this stuff is filled out now here. And again, you'll also probably notice this stuff is like a gray bar here. It's kind of hard to see. I'm looking at my screen share. You might not even tell this is a gray bar. But the gray bar sort of indicates that you can't modify this stuff from the screen. It's sort of pulling from that other setup screen and you can't change it here, which is not really a bad thing, right? We don't want everybody to change this stuff here. But I can verify at least that it looks accurate to me as far as what I supplied for those ones. Furthermore, I can see that this vendor has a federal ID number over here, which again is important because that's going to get tagged onto their 1099 as their taxpayer identification number, which is critical for filing that stuff. These last 2 fields over here are new ones here. So this one's just a little checkbox for receiving 1099 e-form consent. And basically you're supposed to supply your vendors with like an official consent form that says, hey, is it okay if I email you this information, right? It could, get stolen on the internet or whatever. So that's why we have to have their consent here. But if they say, yes, don't bother mailing it to me, just email it to me, you can go ahead and mark that decision here and go ahead and provide an email address that they'd like to receive their 1099 at. So I've just gone ahead and filled out my own email address there. but just want to draw attention to these new fields here on the vendor card and how they're going to function for you. So with all that being said, we saw that, we did the setup, we propagated that stuff for Fabricam. So at this point, I really should be prepared and ready to generate that 1099 for Fabricam. So to get that process kicked off, I'm gonna go back to my home screen, and I'm gonna use a page called IRS Form Documents. And this is, again, sort of our last step here, where we're gonna be reviewing these numbers, transmitting this stuff to the IRS, and also printing/emailing for our vendors. It's all done within this page here. So I'll go ahead and open that. And when I land on that, you'll see that this page is just blank here, which makes sense because the only way that this thing can get populated is by us, and we would populate it using this create forms action on the toolbar. When I do that, it's going to ask me to define a period and a vendor, and even optionally a specific form number if I'd like to generate. Alternatively, I can leave a lot of this blank and just grab it for everybody. So I'll go ahead and say, yeah, I want to do it for 2023, and we'll just do it for Fabricam right now, since they're the only ones that really should have any detail in there, since they're the only ones I propagated anything for. So that should be enough information to have the system do what I need it to do, and I'll go ahead and say, okay. And I can see what it's done there is created this IRS 1099 form document for me. See the period it's related to, vendor number, which form I'm doing, and the status of this thing. And right now the status is called open. So let's go ahead and drill down on this period number here to open up this form and verify if these amounts look accurate for us. So I can drill on 2023 there, and I can see all this detail down here. So again, I can see that they have that form miss, specifically miss 01, which is the one I set up for them. And here I can see that calculated amount. Note that this calculated amount is a drill through field here. And this is what I alluded to earlier when we were doing the assisted setup, and there was that option for copy detail to lines. This is what enables us to actually drill through on this number here and look at all this line level detail that contributed to this annual value here. So you can see there's all these transactions here. Again, these all appeared here because I propagated those options to this posted activity, but all this then, accurately got coded to this stuff that I wanted to. If this amount does not look right to you, you do have the option to go back to those vendor ledger entries and do an edit list to actually modify the amounts or codes on individual transactions. Alternatively, if you just like to do an adjustment to this thing, there is this adjustment amount field over here, which you actually can't interact with from this page here, but we can include adjustments here if we would need to. I'm going to show you how to do that right now. So like I said, you can't do it right from this page, but I sort of, identify that I need to make an adjustment by reviewing this page. So let's go ahead and review that adjustment. That's going to be handled from the IRS reporting periods page. I'm going to use my global search, go there, and right on the toolbar here is adjustments. So if I click on that, it's going to bring up a little box where I can then define what adjustment I'd like to do. So let's adjust a little bit for Fabricam. So I'll select Fabricam in the first drop down there. Which form do I want to adjust? Well, we've been doing Miss 01 the whole time, so I might as well just keep doing that one. And I'll say, they actually needed to have an extra $500 on that. Not sure why I would need to adjust for $500, but I want to show you how to do it. So I've added that there. That's great. Let's go back to our form document now, and let's see what happens. All right, so I'm going to have to refresh this page, but one thing you'll notice here is that it's not even going to appear here, and I'll explain why. So I'm going to navigate off that page, come back into here. And just like I told you, the adjustment amount's still 0 here, even though I just posted a $500 adjustment to this. Why is that? Well, it's because when I hit create forms up here, it's actually taking a point in time of that thing, and it's not looking for any further posted activity. So obviously, if I post an adjustment, I want that to be included in my form here. So to sort of recreate this form, I just go back to the toolbar again and click create forms. I can fill out the criteria the exact same way I just did, except this time around, I'm going to click this little button on the bottom here for replace. And that's going to sort of read that, hey, I already created one for this one. Let's replace it because I've made changes to it. So when I say OK there, do I want to replace the existing forms with new ones? Yes, I do. It seems to have done that successfully. Let's go ahead and drill through and confirm. And awesome. Looks like we got that amount there. So I can see, not only is it reported there, but it's also getting included in this reportable amount here, which you can see is $500 higher than the calculated amount. So that's all great there. So now that we're in a position here where we've sort of got this new setup in here, we've applied the settings to all our vendors, we've subsequently applied those settings to all the vendor entries, now we're ready to actually do something with this 1099. So from this page right here, if I'm ready to submit this to the IRS, I can go under the toolbar under Actions, Release, and there will be a button here. It's not currently visible, but it will be here come January. It's going to be a minor update that Business Central puts out to add this button in here. And the button is going to be called Submit. And what that's going to do, it's going to reach out to that Iris API that I talked about, gather all this information that we've accumulated in Business Central, and remit that to the IRS. And when you click that Submit button, it's going to modify the status of this document over here to submit it. And so again, right now, all I have is the option for mark as submitted. Well, why do I have that option here when I could just have the submit button? Well, one, like I said, it's coming in a future release. But the reason they decided to put this mark as submitted thing here is so that we can test out the next step in the process, which is the printing of this thing or the emailing of this thing directly to the vendor. And you'll notice if I wanted to go ahead and email this thing to the vendor right now using the send email button on the toolbar, it's going to yell at me here. Well, it's actually going to give me another message here that I must set up my email in Business Central before I can send 1099 forms, which I'm unable to do in this environment, so I can't quite get to that point. But if I did have email set up, instead that error message would read, you can't send this thing with a status of open. The status must be submitted. So that's why it's important that we need to submit this thing to the IRS, or at least pretend to submit it to the IRS here in testing, before I'd be able to email that thing out to my vendor. But then I get, like I said, the email or the process is as simple as just going ahead and saying send email here. It'll read that email that I've provided on the vendor card. It'll also confirm that, I said that they can receive this stuff, and it'll go ahead and send that out to them. I will note that you can modify like the body and the text of the email that gets sent out there with those forms. I'm not quite sure that that's necessary for right now, since it is just pretty standard. Basically says, hey, thanks for your business. Here's your 1099. Let us know if you have any questions. But you do have the power to modify those that report if you would need to. All right. So that really should be the end of the training here. So again, please feel free to reach out to Cargus if you have any questions. Open a ticket with us. We can go ahead and review it. But really, the big takeaways that I'd like everybody to have from today is, you will have to go into feature management and turn this thing on. You will have to go ahead and go do all that setup that we reviewed today, and that's pretty much what I wanted to communicate to everybody today. So Michelle, I'm not sure if there have been any questions proposed in the chat. Looks like no.
Nope, I haven't.
Cool. So if anybody has any questions at this time, feel free to throw those in the chat. We'll hang out here for another minute, see if those come in and help you with those questions. But like I said, we're always here to help at Cargus, whether it's in December here as you're practicing this stuff, or whether it's January when you're actually reviewing this, we can help.
I do have a question. It's from Leslie. Last year, Cargus recommended we use the website Tax 1099 to submit our 1099s and email our vendors. It was pretty easy with a small cost. Is there still an advantage to using that website over the new BC functionality?
I'm not sure that there'd be an advantage to using that site. I think, obviously it sounds like you're going to have to pay a little bit there. I'm not sure if that's really a material cost or not. But I think with this new feature, they're sort of trying to get Business Central to the point where people don't have to use external services such as that to accomplish what they need to here. So, I'd say to give this setup an earnest shot here, and if you're just not confident in it or whatever, you can use that other Tax 1099. But this is going to be, our official position here from Cargus is to get set up with this new out-of-the-box feature. Thanks, everybody.